Actual Microsoft AZ-303 exam questions and answers are the best material for you to study this AZ-303 test. Share some Microsoft AZ-303 exam real questions in the video. 1. You wave an Acme directory forest named contoso.com. You install and configure Azure AD Connect to use password path synchronization as the single sign-on, SSO, method. Staging mode is enabled. You review the synchronization results and discover that the Synchronization Service Manager does not display any sync jobs. You need to ensure that the synchronization completes successfully. What should you do? A. From Synchronization Service Manager, run a full import. B. From Azure PowerShell, run start add sync cycle policy type initial. C. Run Azure AD Connect and set the SSO method to pass through authentication. D. Run Azure AD Connect and disable staging mode. 2. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Log Analytics workspace. You have a resource group that contains 100 virtual machines. The virtual machines run Linux. You need to collect events from the virtual machines to the Log Analytics workspace. Which type of data source should you configure in the workspace? A. Syslog. B. Linux performance counters. C. Custom fields. 3. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1 that contains an Azure Virtual Network named VNet1. VNet1 connects to your on-premises network by using Azure ExpressRoute. You need to connect VNet1 to the on-premises network by using a site-to-site VPN. The solution must minimize cost. Which 3 actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. Create a VPN gateway that uses the VPN GW1 SKU. B. Create a connection. C. Create a local site VPN gateway. D. Create a gateway subnet. E. Create a VPN gateway that uses the basic SKU. 4. Your company plans to develop an application that will use a NoSQL database. The database will be used to store transactions and customer information by using JSON documents. Which 2 Azure Cosmos DB APIs can developers use for the application? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. Cassandra. B. Gremlin, Graph. C. MongoDB. D. Azure Table. E. Core, SQL. 5. You have an Azure Container Registry and an Azure Container Instance. You pull an image from the registry, and then update the local copy of the image. You need to ensure that the updated image can be deployed to the container instance. The solution must ensure that you can deploy the updated image or the previous version of the image. What should you do? A. Run the Docker image push command and specify the tag parameter. B. Run the as image copy command and specify the tag parameter. C. Run the as AKS update command and specify the attach ACR parameter. D. Run the kubectl apply command and specify the dry run parameter. 6. You have an application named App1 that does not support Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, authentication. You need to ensure that App1 can send messages to an Azure Service Bus queue. The solution must prevent Apple from listening to the queue. What should you do? A. Modify the locks of the queue. B. Configure access control (IAM) for the service bus. C. Configure access control (IAM) for the queue. D. Add a shared access policy to the queue. 7. You have several Azure Web Apps trial use access keys to access databases. You plan to migrate the access keys to Azure Key Vault. Each app must authenticate by using Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. To gain access to the access keys, what should you create? Azure to ensure that the apps can access the access keys? A. Managed identities. B. Azure policies. C. An app service plan. D. Managed applications. 8. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Sentinel workspace. Sentinel is configured to monitor several Azure resources. You need to send notification emails to resource owners when alerts or recommendations are generated for a resource. What should you use? A. Logic Apps Designer. B. Azure Security Center. C. Azure Pipelines. D. Azure Machine Learning Studio. 9. A company hosts virtual machines, VMs, in an on-premises data center and in Azure. The on-premises and Azure-based VMs communicate using ExpressRoute. The company wants to be able to continue regular operations if the ExpressRoute connection fails. Failover connections must use the Internet and must not require multi-protocol label switching (MPLS) support. You need to recommend a solution that provides continued operations. What should you recommend? A. Set up a second ExpressRoute connection. B. Increase the bandwidth of the existing ExpressRoute connection. C. Increase the bandwidth for the on-premises Internet connection. D. Set up a VPN connection. 10. You plan to create an Azure Logic app that will access secrets stored in an Azure Key Vault. You need to ensure that the Logic app can authenticate to the Key Vault by using Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. What should you do? A. Turn on the system-assigned managed identity. B. Add an Azure Active Directory authorization policy. C. Create an app registration. D. Modify the access keys.